Imagine living in a society where tradition and cultural, your language, your way of doing things, it's always been that way for hundreds of years. And then over the course of a couple of decades, you see changes where you lose your identity, your cultural identity, and people lose their jobs and their function, in this little rural society where their only purpose basically was to commune and be, farmers and had exactly what they need based on the localization of in the regional communities that shared and kept the peace and harmony regardless of one's religious or belief systems, right? Everybody just got along. Well, Helena Norberg Hodges in July of 2018 had written an article about spending 40 years in a little town in the Himalayas, called Ladakh, India, which is known as Little Tibet. And she had written how when she first got there, everything was peaceful and harmony, and everybody got along and everybody participated in society for the good and the benefit of the others. And what she has witnessed in the last 20 to 30 years of the time that she's been there, primarily since about the 1980s, was how corporations have come in and governments have basically centralized bureaucracies and things like that to strip away the importance of their cultural identity. A lot of farmers in that area. India has subsidized imported food that has come in, and the local food's now not affordable. So my question is, from that point, is if you're a society based on farming and you can't even afford the food, it's cheaper to buy imported food from other places. How are you supposed to survive? So going from that scenario, we talk a lot about corporate social responsibility and how corporations take a strategic point of view to address the external social pressures that they face as they expand into these other areas to take resources, whether it's, a physical resource like trees or minerals or whatever, labor, people, strip away farmers and what they do, or, impress upon these societies maybe Western ideas. And, not everybody, I'm not here to argue about democracy, but I am saying, maybe not everybody needs democracy or whatever. That's an argument for a different day. But what about, homogeny, for instance? Do we want to live in a, what Norberg Hodges termed a consumer, what'd she call it? A consumer-driven monoculture world, basically, a consumer monocultural world, which means everything's the same. And lost our languages, traditions, customs, things like that, as more Western ideas filtrate in and make those changes. So, Freinus and Melhi in talking about CSR, corporate social responsibility, said the only way to be proactive in that sense is when corporations align themselves with social and environmental goals with their core business strategies. I get that point and think that's valid, at least on that half of things. I'm just saying I don't know that the problem with globalization is it's always about profit ultimately. Even if you're aligning the social pressures of the environment in which you are, and you're going to align those with your core competencies, again, it's all about, from that perspective, the corporation, what of the people. I mean, again, I'm not arguing, this is not a talk on democracy and things, or conspiracy and things like that, but I am thinking that the rise of technology, which is leading to more artificial intelligence, more about robots, less about the people, probably leads to the loss of cultural identity and forces more people into poverty as these corporations continue to strip resources from many of these areas, around the globe. Um, the one thing I've noticed in some of the reading, or a lot of the reading I've done, is we tend to talk about expansion, about taking on more, about crossing the barriers to entry to make more money, to be profitable, to give to the stakeholders and shareholders and things like that. Well, what happens if things like that, contract? What's the contingency plan? If subsidies are a way to prop up something, right? I mean, subsidies means it's not real. You can't obtain it all, or you can't afford it all, or whatever that is. At some point, it's going to collapse. Whether you look at the car industry or the oil industry from the 1970s, the car industries in the 80s, the housing bubble in 2008. When you prop up things that aren't real, it's fake. It'll ultimately collapse. So my idea we're spreading is about localization and getting back to the basics of community, and having those community be dependent upon themselves more so, and away from those centralized bureaucracies. So in here's another little story I want to share. In 1405, in Bamberg, Germany, actually I guess they call it Bamberg, Germany, Schlenkerla Brewery was first created. 1405, that's 613 years ago, right? It's been around since 1405. It's still in existence today, actually. I've met the owner, Matthias Trum, I believe is his name. He took over. They're in the seventh generation of the Grasser Trum family. They have owned it since 1866. Now, I bring this up because even though this isn't exactly what we've been talking about as far as multinational corporations, I think it's interesting because you can go, at least in Kentucky, and I know alcohol distribution laws and import laws are different in different places across the U.S., but you can go to a decent liquor store in the state of Kentucky, and buy Schlenkerla beer. They're really known for their smoked porter because the old method from the smoke and the wood on the fire would get into the beer, and they're always rated in the top, 10, 20 beers in the world from that perspective. And so they do a lot of importing across the world. My friend Roger, who also knows Matthias Trum and has been to Bamberg lots of times, in fact, he's making another trek later on this year, told me a story when he saw Matthias a couple years ago, that asked Matthias if he was worried about losing money when it comes to the exports of beer from Germany and being imported across the world. So, and an interesting, from the beerinstitute.org actually, from June 2017 to June 2018, beer imports to the U.S. from Germany are actually down 33.7%. Now, I tell you that to say that what Matthias relayed to Roger, my friend Roger, was the fact that he got into the business to drink beer at his brewery, to keep the brewery in the family, to keep that brewery's lineage alive, and carry it on into future generations. They actually brew more beer in Bamberg, Germany, for Schlenkerla at that location that is drank out of that pub than they do with all the exports they send across the world. And I thought that was interesting because, basically Matthias wants to just burn up beer to keep the bar open, basically, in Bamberg. And I think that's just really interesting. The whole idea of corporate and corporations, and the idea of taking more and wanting to do more, he wants to keep it local ultimately. And so I want to wrap this up by saying, if contextual 3D thinking is hindsight plus foresight and it equals insight, then why do people allow the corporations and other institutions like the World Bank and the IMF to exploit governments and government regulations in favor of sacrificing local communities. From my overall perspective, more people and communities need to fight globalization in an effort to find a more balanced and freer society in which to live. Thank you.